a wall. But all of these things, when we're talking about thicker than water, we're just saying our family. Our family is there. You didn't pick it. You can't choose it. But what we do is we can choose and we can decide what do we do with these relationships that will always be there. And so today, I want you guys to think about changes. I want you to think about the things that can change in life, things that are different now that weren't different just a couple of years ago. We've joked about this. Actually, I think we joked about it on Wednesday night, not too long ago, about like certain styles, certain things you used to do just like 3 or 4 years ago. How many of you you look back on photos just from like 3 years ago and you're like, why did I wear that? Why did I do my hair like that? Why, I don't understand why I would ever thought that was something cool. We see. And if you're in 6th grade right now, hopefully every 6th grader is like, well, yeah, because I was in 3rd grade. So obviously my style, my parents laid my clothes out back then. And so hopefully you can see. By the way, how many of you all, your parents still put clothes out for you? Martin? I appreciate your honesty, Colton. Every day. Here you go, Martine. Wear this. All right. Now, just raise your hand. How many of you guys, the music you listened to just 4 or 5 years ago is not the same people you listen to now? Just raise your hand. No side conversation. Like the music, the artists you listen to, you no longer listen to those same music people. Maybe the style of music you listen to. I have really bad influence friends, and for some reason, all I listen to is country music lately. I think about a month ago, I was subliminally damaged by the amount of country music I was exposed to, and that's all I listen to now. And so, it's completely changed. It's all changed. It's crazy. So things change sometimes. Now, your clothes can change. Your styles change. What you listen to change. Now, let's switch it a little. Let's take a little serious note. How many of you would say the friends that you used to hang out with, this is no point or talk or anything, no stories, but just think about it. You can raise your hand, but without being mean. But just the friendships that you used to have 2 or 3 years ago, you're no longer friends with the same groups of people. Just raise your hand if that's you at all. All right. So we can see how things can change over the few years. And I guarantee if some of our juniors and seniors in here, probably almost all of them would have their hands raised at that. We also know that as things change, changes can pop up within our families. We can have big changes and things take place within our family and our relationships and within our home. Maybe you may move to a new house and it's threw you off for a while because there was a house that you grew up in and that was the house you've always been at, and even maybe you got a new house and it was bigger and better and everything, but it's it still feels weird, I still miss my old house. And so there can be changes in that. There can be changes in schools. Maybe you switch from one school to another. And maybe for some of that's good, you used to be at one school, now you're at a mid-school. Maybe you're a mid-school and now you're at a high school. And that was really difficult to change into. All of a sudden this school's bigger or this school's different. I don't know these people. I still remember the first day of my freshman year of high school being why do these dudes have beards? This is terrifying. I knew high school was coming. I had friends in high school, but I walk in and I'm these are men here. These are men in front of my locker, and I was terrified. Changes can happen. Changes happen, and within our families, there may be a parent loses a job, and you're kind of in that switch of my family's stressing right now, and I don't know what to do. There can be changes even in the relationship between you and your brother and sister, and we used to be really close all the time, but now they just they're off on their own, or they're around their own friends. Or they're growing up. They're not the normal little brother or little sister they used to be. Now they're kind of their own person. We see these changes take place. The changes even in your relationship with your parents may have changed over the past few years. They always did everything, and now I'm getting some responsibility. Or now I'm butting heads with them because I want more responsibility or I want more of that trust than what I'm getting. But these things can take place. Some of you guys have had big changes in households. Some of it's good. Some of it may be really tough. Some of it may have been hurtful. So what do we do? What do we do when there are changes in our families? What do we do when there's been big things that have disrupted and changed the norm of what our family used to look like or used to go through or take place? And how do we get through that? Because we know change is coming. I think that's the big thing to first understand. The first thing we need to understand is everybody in here, adults, students, there will go through changes. There will be big changes. Some of it's really good and exciting, and some of it will be really hard. And it can be tough times to get through. Whether it's from changes in relationship, whether it's a death in the family, whether it's a split in the family or broken relationships, things can be hard and they can be great, but we know there's going to be changes in our life. And the scripture verse we're looking at here today is about that change. We see in this book of Ecclesiastes, who was written by King Solomon. And we've talked about Solomon before. So you have David and Goliath David became king. And eventually he had some sons. And one of his sons was Solomon. And when Solomon became king, he prayed. And his one prayer to God was, grant me wisdom. I don't care about power. I don't care about money. I pray that I can rule with wisdom. Because Solomon understood, if I have wisdom that is from God, then money and stuff may happen. Then I can be a good leader, and I don't have to worry about power if I have the right wisdom. And so we see in Ecclesiastes, like a lot of Solomon's writings and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes was just like nothing but his wisdom that was from God pouring over. And in Ecclesiastes, Solomon writes this, and this is like way back in the Old Testament. And he says, there is a time for everything, a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal. And he's talking about battles and war. So if you're like, time to kill, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about battles, a time to tear down and a time to build. And when you think about this, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter the stones and a time to gather them up, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And Ecclesiastes was kind of a poetic book that he wrote. It is a very long section. But what he's trying to get the reader and for his nation of Israel to understand is there is always a time for something. And in doing so, what he's trying to make very clear is when people are like, well, why is this stuff bad happening? And we get mad at God. And we're like, well, God must not be there. And so people are turning their back on God. And hey, why is there hunger in our land right now? And they get mad at God and they turn their back on God. And so they're like, well, why is all this stuff happening? And what he wants his people to understand here is, look, there are times that take place that are going to be tough. There are times that things happen that we don't understand, but it doesn't mean God's not there. It's just what happens because we live in a broken world. There is sin in our world. Sometimes there's really good stuff that takes place and we celebrate, and sometimes there's very difficult things that happen in our world. But he's like, we can't just blame God because there's a change in these times and the things go through this. And this is what the reader's he's trying to get his people to understand as the king of saying, look, we don't turn our back on God. We need to understand God is there, but there will be these times that go. Sometimes it's going to be amazing. Sometimes it's going to be hard. Sometimes you're going to get along with your family. Sometimes you're not going to get along with your family. Sometimes everything's going to be amazing and awesome, and sometimes it's going to be hurtful. Sometimes there'll be things that take place in our family that we don't understand. Sometimes there'll be things that happen that you can't control at all. It has nothing to do with the kids, but something going on other parts of the family that you don't know about. There will be changes and things that take place, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's because other people are in the wrong, and we just have to go through it. And it's difficult and it's tough, but what he's trying to get them to understand here is God is still there. Isaiah has a really good, and all this stuff is written to this nation of Israel in the Old Testament. And Isaiah says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And this is like from God to his people. I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. And God's not literally saying, so walk through fire because I'm there. But he's saying when you go through difficult times, I will be there for you. And so you have King Solomon saying, look, there will be hard times and there's going to be good times. And that may come in whatever form it is, but it's definitely in your family situation. There are good times in our family and there are tough times in our families. And he's letting people know God will be there for you. God will be there. There is a constant. There is a strength in that. And so knowing God is there doesn't mean that like difficult things or tricky things won't happen. It just means when they do, we know that there's safety in God. We know that we have a God that we can go to, a God that we can pray to, a God that is relational and is there for us and with us. And that is what they were trying to get their people to understand, is that no matter what takes place, God is there. And so we can't control everything. And I think this is one of the hardest things to do. If you've ever been through something really hard, if you've ever had some really difficult things take place in your family, you know one of the worst feelings is like you can't control it. You can't control what's happening. And when you have that feeling of like, I don't know what to do and it's not my fault. It's not my fault my parents did this. It's not my fault this person got sick. It's not my fault that this person passed away. It's not my fault that my brothers or my sisters are fighting. I didn't do anything and I don't want to be involved in this, but it's hard and it's tricky. What do I do? And we have this like feeling of like, I can't control it. But one thing we can know is, but I can still choose to go to God with these things. I can choose to turn my back on God or I can choose to turn to God. And that's what I do know. I do know that to be true. And so as you guys go to your groups here in a minute, I want you to think about these things of understanding. We need to understand change will happen. The worst lie, the worst thing that ever happened in Christianity in the church is believing, if you believe in God, everything perfect is going to be in your life. It never says that in the Bible. It never says, hey, once you become a Christian, just understand your whole world's going to be perfect. Go buy a lottery ticket because it's going to be a winner. Hey, when you walk up to Petland, they're just going to hand you a puppy because you're a Christian now. You know, just walk along and, hey, just walk into a dealership and they'll probably just give you a brand new car because you're a Christian and it's all going to be perfect. That's not true. Things still happen. Tough things still happen. Hard things still happen. Hurtful things still happen. Amazing things happen. There's going to be times in life where it's both. What we need to understand is, what do I do when tough things do happen? When change does happen, what do I do when change is happening in my family that I can still go to God? I can still go to God. And just like that verse in Isaiah says, I know that God is with me. I know God is with me when I don't understand these things. I know God is there when the changes are going on in my family that feel like rough waters. It feels like there's flames around. It feels like there's just everything's piling up. I know that I can go to God. And I know that I can trust in Him when these changes are going on, when there are tough times, when there's big changes in my family or my relationships. I know that I can trust in Him. And so the biggest thing, and as you guys go to your small groups here in a second, I just want to encourage you, pray and pray and pray. The biggest thing we overlook in our Christian relationship with God is believing that He hears us. Is thinking that, well, I went to church. It's relational. So if there are changes going on in your family right now, if there are some difficult things taking place within your own family, I want to encourage you, pray. Give it to God. Like, this isn't something we just talk about. There's a very real God that hears your prayers. Begin praying and praying and praying. And go to that God who says, hey, there will be changes, but I will be here for you. And I want you guys to go to your small groups here in a second and talk more about that. So I'm going to pray and dismiss you. You can leave your chairs right where they're at unless you're taking them to your small group. God, I thank you so much for our students, and just thank you just for the honesty of your scriptures. You never said life was going to be perfect, and there will be a time to laugh, but there's also a time to cry. There's going to be a time of good things and amazing things, and there's also going to be a time of hardship and pain. God, we live in a broken world, and we have, people going through all different things, and sometimes hurtful things will take place. And we need to understand not to blame you for them, but to turn to you for them. And that can be really, really difficult, especially when it comes to our family. Those relationships matter so much. And so when change happens in our family, it can hurt so much. And God, I pray that we know that when that happens in our families, we can always go to you. We can go to you even when we don't understand, and we can trust that you are there with us. Amen. All right, you guys can go on to your small groups, and I believe we should have everybody here. We should be good to go.